Hi, I'm Miles and this is Auto-Minded. What if I were to tell you the story of a passionate British house that was reinvigorated by the arrival of an outcast American, and the whole thing came crashing down because they let a rival into the house? Huh? Sounds a lot like a plot to Downton Abbey, doesn't it? It's actually the story of secret Rovers, because this is the development story of the Rover P8 sedan and P9 coupe. These were two vehicles specifically created around a new powerhouse that Rover got when they picked up an ex-General Motors V8. And the reason why their story is so important is because they were a casualty of one of the most turbulent times in the British auto industry. When these cars were still just paper drawings in the mid-60s, Rover was actually just its own independent automaker in a sea of British independent automakers. But over the course of 2 years, a lot of combining happened. First, Rover joined up with the conglomerate of Leyland Motors Group, and they were doing that to combat BMH. Well, the two of those even combined to make one big company that would eventually become British Leyland.
Austin, MG, Triumph, Mini, Jaguar, Daimler, Princess, Morris, Rover. All with super cover. Great cars and a great deal more.
So cars like the P8 and P9 were made to fight Jaguars, but now Jaguars were their stablemates. And while both the P8 and P9 were fully developed, Rover never got the chance to bring them to market. In fact, the project cancellation was so late for the P8 that the dies had even been ordered to mass produce the body. Now you might be one of those people who don't really find this interesting because you didn't even really know that Rover made cars. But take a little time to dive in a little bit deeper because there's a lot of things going on around this time. Well, one good example is that while they were trying to develop the P8 and the P9, Rover was also developing the first Range Rover, and so there was a lot of engineering being scattered everywhere. And even though Jaguar was in the same company, they still made themselves a rival, so they put in a lot of features that were going to fight the Rovers that they thought were on the way. But the reason why I even talk about this book is because the story is a bit personal for me. The first time I ever went to a car museum outside the USA was the British Motor Museum, and the surviving P9 prototype is a mainstay there. It's a captivating car with sharp angles, cracking paint, and even bolts in the T-top that all tell you that this was really a used test mule. It's a really cool what could have been, and so that's why I've always taken plenty of pictures. But it also feels personal because every time I go back and revisit it, I can kind of remember where I was and chart my own personal automotive growth. That's why the story's personal for me. And if I'm ever going to find a fault in the book, it's also because I think it's personal for the authors. Because when you read it, you know the authors really wanted the P8 and the P9 to come to the road. Heck, I did too. But the one thing that they don't really talk about is, well, looking at the market where they would have been had they existed. Because these were supposed to come around in 1972, and that would mean they were really starting to hit their stride right about the same time the 1973 oil crisis was hitting. The UK home market would have not been kind to the V8 Duo once they saw their fuel prices quadruple and the recession hit. And things weren't too much better in the USA where there was supposed to be a growth market. After all, the fuel crisis sent us into the arms of efficient Japanese cars, not V8 luxury machines. And if that wasn't already enough, don't forget that 1974 was also the year that we started bringing new bumper laws. And you can remember some beautiful British machines had their lines ruined because of that. So basically there's an argument here that these Rover cars could have made British Leyland more vulnerable because the pumps unexpectedly ran dry for their V8s, and well, they were going to need some extra investment just to stay in the USA. And if that Duo missed their sales targets, well, it wouldn't have completely knocked out British Leyland, but a failure of that size could bring an already weak company to its knees even quicker. Now, I'm in no position whatsoever to suggest that British Leyland dodged a bullet for not bringing the P8 and P9 to production. But, well, there's a little bit of a feeling here that maybe, just maybe, these cars lived their best lives when they were just paper and clay. Because, after all, being unique and interesting, that doesn't guarantee sales success. But a good tragic story? It's always a good read. Thanks for watching.